No one in the marble lobby of Valemont Medical believed the man who had just pushed through the revolving doors was a billionaire. To them, he looked like a poor man who had wandered into the wrong world. There was mud on the heels of his old sneakers. His gray jacket was wrinkled, faded at the shoulders and covered with dust, as if he had come straight from a construction site or a noisy street market. His hair was messy. Sweat clung to his forehead. His breathing was heavy from running. But what made everyone stare was not the way he looked. It was the little girl in his arms. She was about 6 years old, so small she almost disappeared against his chest. Her face was pale. Her lips had turned faintly blue. Her tiny fingers gripped the front of his shirt as if she were trying to hold on to the last safe thing in the world. Every breath she took was thin and broken, a sharp little sound like air struggling through a locked door. The man did not look at anyone. He did not look at the crystal chandelier above him. He did not look at the white marble floors. He did not look at the wealthy patients staring at the mud on his shoes as though it were an insult. He looked only at the emergency desk. "Please," he said, his voice low but tight with terror. "My daughter can't breathe. She needs a doctor now." The receptionist lifted her head. For the first second, she looked at the child. Then her eyes moved down to the father's clothes. An old jacket, cheap jeans, muddy shoes, no expensive watch, no driver, no assistant, nothing that suggested he belonged in Valemont. Valemont was not a hospital for ordinary people. It was where politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and old money families came when they did not want to wait, did not want to stand in line, and did not want to hear the words, "overcrowded emergency room." The elevators were trimmed in gold. The patient suites had private sitting rooms. The nurses spoke so softly it felt as if even sound had been trained to behave. Every chair in the lobby looked more expensive than the first car most working people ever owned. The receptionist placed her fingers on the keyboard, but she did not type. "Sir, this is a private medical center. Emergency intake requires registration and an initial financial deposit before treatment can begin." The man looked down at his daughter. The little girl tried to breathe again, but all that came out was a weak, dry wheeze. "She needs oxygen first, paperwork later." "Policy is policy, sir." From the waiting area on the right someone laughed, not loudly, but sharply enough to cut through the entire lobby. A man in a navy suit rose from his seat. On his wrist was a silver watch bright enough to catch the light. His smile carried the easy cruelty of someone who had never once had to beg anyone to save the person he loved. His name was Adrian Vale. He was the fiancé of Vivian Hart, and the city knew him by prettier names: brilliant investor, elegant gentleman, the perfect future husband of the most powerful female CEO in private healthcare. Adrian looked Ethan up and down, then smiled at the people sitting nearby, as if he had just discovered the morning's entertainment. Valemont really is becoming too generous. Now anyone can carry a child in here and expect VIP treatment. A few people lowered their eyes, a few people smiled, no one spoke. The father held his daughter tighter. He turned slightly, using his shoulder to shield her from the eyes around them. It was a small gesture, but Vivian Hart saw it. Vivian was sitting in a private waiting area not far away. Beside her was Grace, her 8-year-old daughter, a thin and quiet girl in a cream-colored dress, holding a tablet against her chest. Grace had come to Valemont for another heart examination, something that had happened so many times she could recognize the smell of the pediatric wing before the elevator doors even opened. Vivian had not planned to get involved. She had trained herself not to step into chaos that was not hers. As CEO of Hart Medical Ventures, she knew every move she made could be watched, interpreted, and turned into a headline. One careless sentence could become a scandal. One moment of softness could become weakness in a boardroom. But then she heard the child breathing. It was not crying. It was not whining. It was the sound of a small body fighting for air. And in that moment, Vivian was no longer the CEO who could silence a boardroom with a single glance. She was simply a mother. Vivian stood. The sound of her heels crossed the marble floor with clean, deliberate force. The lobby turned to look. Adrian looked too, his smile faltering. Vivian walked straight to the intake desk. "Take the child to emergency care," she said. The receptionist froze. "Ms. Hart, hospital policy." "I did not ask about policy. I told you to take the child to emergency care." Adrian stepped beside her and lowered his voice, as if he were trying to calm a woman who had become emotional. "Vivian, you don't need to do this. We don't know who this man is. He could be taking advantage of you." Vivian did not look at him. I know what a child sounds like when she cannot breathe." Then she turned to the father. For the first time since he had entered Valemont, Ethan Cole saw someone look at him not as a stain on the marble floor, and not as a problem to be removed. She looked at him like a father. "I'll cover the deposit," Vivian said. "Get her inside." Ethan looked at her for 1 second. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, fear, and running, but there was no surrender in them. "I don't need your money," he said quietly. "I need them to stop wasting time." The lobby went still. Adrian laughed, but the laugh died on his lips, because at that exact moment Lily's hand slipped from her father's shirt, her small head tilted to one side. Her body went limp in Ethan's arms. For 1 second the world fell out from under him. "Lily." Ethan's voice was not loud enough to shatter glass, but it was enough to chill every person in the lobby. It was not the voice of an angry man. It was the voice of a father standing at the edge of a cliff. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the lobby, turned his daughter gently onto her side, supported her head with one hand, and checked her airway with movements so fast that even a nearby nurse stared in shock. "Call pediatrics. Get oxygen ready. Severe allergic reaction. Now." This time no one laughed. 2 nurses rushed forward. A doctor ran in from the hallway. A stretcher was pushed through the lobby. Ethan placed Lily on it but did not let go of her hand. He moved beside the stretcher, his eyes locked on his daughter's face. Vivian stepped back to clear the way, but her heart did not move back with her. She saw Ethan's hand tremble, only slightly. Then he clenched it as if forcing all his fear back inside himself. He answered the doctor in short, precise sentences. What she had eaten, what she was allergic to, when the breathing trouble had started, whether she had a fever, whether she had taken any medication. He was terrified. Vivian knew he was terrified down to the bone, but he would not allow that fear to stand between his daughter and survival, and that was why she could not look away from him. 27 minutes later, Lily was out of immediate danger. She lay in a pediatric observation room with a small oxygen tube under her nose. Her soft brown hair clung to her damp forehead. One little hand rested on top of the blanket, her fingers occasionally curling as if searching for her father's shirt even in sleep. Ethan stood outside the glass. He stood straight, but no one knew his legs had almost gone numb. For the past half hour he had not sat down. He had not drunk water. He had not made a call. He had done nothing except watch his daughter breathe. Every time Lily's chest rose, Ethan breathed with her. Vivian stood several steps behind him. Grace stood beside her mother, looking through the glass at the sleeping girl. "Is she going to be okay, Mommy?" Grace asked softly. Vivian placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I think so." Grace looked at the father by the glass. He was really scared. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "But he didn't cry." Vivian looked at Ethan. "Some people don't cry because they're not allowed to fall apart," she said. Just then the hospital administrator arrived with the head of security. Adrian came with them, hands in his pockets, his confidence slowly returning. "Mr. Cole, is it?" the administrator asked. Ethan did not turn around. "Is my daughter stable?" "She is stable for now, but we still need to discuss payment, identity verification, and the use of emergency services outside proper procedure." Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, only 1 second, then he turned. The exhaustion was still there. The mud was still on his shoes. The dust was still on his jacket, but the air around him had changed. Adrian folded his arms. "You should be grateful Vivian saved you from being removed from the building," he said. "But don't think carrying a child in here gives you the right to disrupt Valemont's standards." Ethan looked at him. His eyes were calm in a way that felt dangerous. "What standards?" Ethan asked. "The standard that makes a dying child wait for a deposit." Adrian gave a thin smile. "Don't turn yourself into a moral hero. You came in here looking like that with no paperwork, no deposit, no appointment. The hospital had every right to be cautious." "The hospital has every right to verify after saving a life," Ethan said. "Not before giving oxygen." The administrator tried to step in. "Sir, we understand you are emotional, but Valemont serves a very particular class of clients. We have standards to protect." "Standards?" Ethan took 1 step closer, not quickly, not loudly, but with each step the man in front of him instinctively moved back. Ethan reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and took out an old leather wallet. From inside it, he removed a black card. There was no flashy design, only a small silver emblem in the corner. The administrator looked at the card, then at the name printed on it. Ethan Cole. In 3 seconds the color drained from his face. 3 seconds earlier, he had looked at Ethan like a poor inconvenience. 3 seconds later, he looked at Ethan like a storm that was about to destroy his career. "Mr. Cole," the administrator whispered, chairman of Cole Meridian Retail Group. The lobby seemed to stop breathing. A woman holding a coffee cup froze. A man in a gray suit turned sharply. The receptionist behind the desk went pale. Cole Meridian. No one in the city had not heard that name. A massive retail empire that owned hundreds of supermarkets, convenience stores, logistics centers, household supply chains, and some of the largest medical supply distribution contracts in the region. Ethan Cole was not a poor father who had wandered into a private hospital. He was one of the richest men in the city. That morning he had been undercover inside one of his own stores, dressed like a low-paid delivery worker, secretly inspecting how his employees treated ordinary customers. When the call came from Lily's school saying she could not breathe, he did not go home to change. He did not call his driver. He did not wait for an assistant. He ran. He simply ran to the nearest place that could save his daughter. Vivian looked at him. Not because he was rich. She had met too many rich men in her life for wealth alone to impress her. What changed the way she saw him was that he had not used the name Ethan Cole to open the door. He had allowed himself to be humiliated, laughed at, and delayed as long as his daughter was treated first. A man like that, Vivian thought, was either very proud or very wounded. Maybe both. Ethan handed the card to the administrator. "Charge every expense to me. Then send me the names of everyone who stood in this lobby and allowed a child to wait for oxygen because her father had mud on his shoes." No one answered. Adrian was the first to break the silence. "Impressive. A billionaire pretending to be poor so he can lecture everyone about compassion. How long did you prepare this performance?" Ethan looked directly at him. A man who can watch a child struggling to breathe and still laugh has no right to talk about performance. Adrian's smile hardened. Vivian turned and looked at her fiancé. For the first time that day, a small crack appeared in her eyes. Grace quietly approached the glass outside Lily's room. She looked inside for a long time, then asked Ethan in a soft but serious voice, "What's her name?" Ethan turned. When he looked at Grace, the coldness in his eyes faded. "Lily. Does she like stuffed animals?" Ethan paused. "Yes, but I forgot her rabbit today." Grace thought for a moment. Then she took the small stuffed bear clipped to her bag and handed it to Ethan. "She can borrow this until you bring her rabbit." Vivian looked at her daughter. Grace rarely let anyone touch her things. Ethan accepted the bear with both hands, as if it were worth far more than it was. "Thank you." Grace nodded. "I come to hospitals a lot too, so I know. It's scary to wake up without something familiar beside you." The sentence fell gently between them, light as paper, but it hurt the adults in a deep place. That was how the two girls first entered each other's lives. Not in a playground, not at school, but through the glass of a hospital room where one child had just fought her way back to breath, and the other had grown used to living beside the sound of heart monitors. That afternoon, Lily woke up. The first thing she did was call for her father. Ethan was sitting beside the bed, close enough to notice the slightest movement of her fingers. "Daddy, I'm here. Where's Pepper?" Ethan closed his eyes as if someone had struck him in the chest. He had run so fast that he had left Pepper, Lily's white stuffed rabbit, in his old car outside the school. "I'm sorry. I'll get him right away." Grace, who had been standing outside with her mother, pushed the door open. She placed her small stuffed bear on Lily's bed. "You can borrow mine first." Lily looked at the bear, then at Grace. "Who are you?" "I'm Grace." "I'm Lily." "I know, your dad told me." Lily blinked, then hugged the bear to her chest. "Are you rich?" Vivian froze. Ethan looked up. Grace considered the question with complete seriousness, as if it were part of an exam. "My mom is rich, but I only have a few stuffed animals." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Okay, you can sit." Grace sat. And for the first time in weeks, Vivian heard her daughter truly laugh. Not a polite smile for doctors, not an obedient little laugh for guests, but the bright sound of a child allowed to be a child. Vivian stood in the doorway, motionless. She had not expected that sound to hurt so much. She had given Grace everything. The best schools, the best doctors, the softest clothes, the cleanest food, the most professional caregivers. But perhaps in trying so hard to protect her daughter from the world, Vivian had built a glass room around her. Beautiful, safe, and lonely. Ethan stepped into the hallway after Lily fell asleep again. He found Vivian standing alone. "Thank your daughter for me." Vivian looked through the door. "I should be thanking yours. Grace hasn't laughed like that in a long time." Ethan did not answer immediately. He had heard many kinds of pain in the voices of adults: pain from losing money, pain from betrayal, pain from damaged pride. But the pain in Vivian's voice now was one only parents understood. It was the pain of realizing that you could love your child deeply and still miss a part of their heart. "I don't think anyone becomes a parent without making mistakes." Vivian turned to him. "You say that as if you've forgiven yourself." Ethan looked at Lily through the glass. "I haven't. I've only learned not to let regret slow me down when she needs me." Vivian did not ask more, but those words stayed with her for a long time. That evening, a pediatric doctor entered Lily's room with lab results in his hand. He had planned to speak quickly, gently, in the careful way doctors speak when they do not want to frighten parents. But when he saw Ethan, Vivian, and Grace all in the room, he hesitated. "Mr. Cole, we found an unusual inflammatory marker in Lily's blood." Ethan stood immediately. "What does that mean?" "We can't draw a final conclusion yet, but this marker is rare. It resembles a reaction that can appear after exposure to certain experimental medication during infancy." The air in the room went cold. Ethan looked at his sleeping daughter. "I never gave anyone permission to use experimental medication on my child." Vivian suddenly turned toward the doctor. "What marker?" The doctor looked at her, then at Grace. "Ms. Hart." "Answer me." The doctor went silent for 1 second. "Grace has the same marker." Vivian felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her. Grace stood beside Lily's bed, still holding the little bear she had not taken back. She looked up at her mother, not fully understanding the adult words, but sensitive enough to know something terrible had entered the room. Ethan stepped closer to the doctor. "What are the odds of two unrelated children having the same marker?" The doctor avoided his eyes. "Very low." "How low?" "Almost impossible, unless there was a shared source of exposure." Vivian clenched her hand. "What source?" "We need to review both girls' early medical records." Ethan spoke at once. "Get them." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Lily's early records aren't in the Valemont system. Grace's records." Vivian stared at him. "What?" "Some parts are access restricted." "Restricted by whom?" The doctor did not answer, but his eyes flicked almost involuntarily toward the hallway, where Adrian was standing. From that day on, the story was no longer only about a father being humiliated in a private hospital. It became a question neither Ethan nor Vivian could turn away from. Who had touched their daughters' bodies when the girls were too young to protect themselves? And why had the evidence been buried inside the most prestigious medical system in the city? For the next 3 days, Valemont became a quiet battlefield. Outside, everything still looked elegant. Fresh flowers were replaced every morning. The marble floors still shone. Nurses still spoke in gentle voices. Wealthy families still crossed the lobby believing money could buy safety. But inside closed conference rooms, Ethan and Vivian began digging into what Valemont had hidden. Ethan had Cole Meridian's legal team review the medical supply contracts. Vivian called a private medical investigator that even her own board did not know about. They found inflated invoices, pediatric drug shipments listed under false vendor names, money from a charity fund for poor children redirected through shell companies, and worst of all, a public pediatric care fund that had once been praised in the media had been drained for years. Poor children had been turned away at the door. Families without deposits had been sent to overcrowded public hospitals. Meanwhile, donations made in the name of saving children had flowed into a network where Adrian Vale's name appeared far too often to be coincidence. When Ethan placed the first file in front of Vivian, she did not open it right away. She looked at Adrian's name on the page. The man who had proposed to her in front of Grace. The man who had once sat by her daughter's hospital bed and read stories aloud. The man who had told Vivian he loved both of them. It could be a mistake. Her voice was not as strong as she wanted it to be. Ethan did not push. He only said, "I hope it is." Vivian looked at him. There was no triumph in Ethan's eyes, no satisfaction from proving himself right, only exhaustion, and that made it hurt even more. Because if Ethan also hoped this was a mistake, then perhaps the truth was even uglier than she feared. Adrian sensed the change quickly. He was not stupid. People who betray others for years become very sensitive to the eyes of those who are about to stop trusting them. He began appearing more often beside Vivian. He brought flowers for Grace. He bought toys for Lily. He answered the press with a face full of careful sadness and polished compassion. The most important thing right now is the health of these two little girls. Valemont has always put children first. Ethan stood behind the crowd of reporters and watched silently. Adrian was good at performing. He knew when to lower his head, when to soften his voice around words like children, family, and hope, when to place his hand on Vivian's shoulder just long enough for the cameras to catch it. But Ethan had seen many liars. What made Adrian different was not that he hid his falsehood well. It was that he believed the people around him needed a beautiful image too badly to look behind it. On the fourth night, Grace suddenly worsened. The heart monitor began to beep in sharp, urgent bursts. Vivian woke from the chair beside her daughter's bed and rushed forward as Grace clutched her chest, her face pale with pain. "Mommy, my heart hurts." Doctors and nurses ran in. Ethan, who had been in the next room with Lily, heard the alarm and stepped into the hallway. He saw a nurse carrying a medication tray toward Grace's room. One tiny detail made him stop: the cap of the vial, the color of the label, the batch code. Ethan had built part of his empire through medical supply distribution. He knew real packaging. He knew sealed labels. He knew shipping codes. He knew the kinds of small differences ordinary people never noticed. He moved fast. "Stop." The nurse startled. "Sir, this is emergency medication." "I said stop." Vivian turned from the room. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan picked up the vial and held it to the light. "This batch code does not belong to Valemont inventory." The doctor frowned. "That's impossible." Ethan looked at him, scanned it again. Another nurse, shaking slightly, picked up the scanner. A beep sounded. The screen showed an error, not in system. Vivian stared at the vial. Then she looked at her daughter lying in the bed, lips pale, eyes wet with pain. In that moment, something inside Vivian broke. Not grief, the last piece of hesitation. Who prepared this medication? No one answered. Who knew Grace's medication schedule tonight? Still no one answered, but one name stood in the room even before anyone said it: Adrian. That night Vivian confronted him in the private waiting room. No reporters, no board members, no flattering lights, only two people and a truth slowly taking shape between them. "Were you in the medication room tonight?" Adrian looked at her as if she had wounded him. "Are you questioning me like a criminal? Answer me." "I went in to check on Grace's situation." "You are not a doctor." "I am your fiancé. I care about her." Vivian looked at him. "Grace said she saw you in the medication room." Adrian went silent, only for 1 second, but for Vivian that 1 second was long enough to bury an engagement. Then he exhaled, rubbed a hand over his face, and when he looked up again, his eyes were red. He cried, not because he was sorry, because he knew tears could soften the truth in other people's eyes. "Vivian, don't you see what's happening? Ethan is manipulating you. He came in looking pitiful so you would feel sorry for him. Then he used his daughter to get close to you. Now he's making you doubt me. A stranger is destroying the family we were about to build." Vivian stood very still. Adrian stepped closer. "I love Grace. I love you. I stayed beside you when no one else could handle how cold you were. And him, what does he want? Valemont, Hart Medical, or maybe you?" For one very brief moment, Vivian almost wavered. Not because she fully believed him, but because people want to believe they were not foolish enough to love someone cruel. Then Grace's voice came from the doorway. "Mom." Vivian turned. Grace stood there so weak she had to hold the doorframe. Lily stood beside her holding the stuffed bear, her face full of worry. Grace looked at Adrian. "Uncle Adrian told the nurse not to let Mommy know." The room went completely silent. Adrian looked at Grace. For the first time his mask cracked in a way everyone could see. "Grace, you're tired. You don't know what you heard." Grace squeezed Lily's hand. "I know." Vivian stepped in front of her daughter, shielding her with her body. When she looked back at Adrian, the woman who had once loved him was gone. Only a mother remained. And Adrian, no matter how carefully he had disguised himself, finally understood that he had lost his place in her life. But men like Adrian do not disappear when exposed. They attack. The next morning the media erupted. Adrian appeared before reporters with a tired face that had been perfectly prepared. He spoke of chaos, responsibility, emotional decisions. He said Vivian was being controlled by fear. He said Ethan Cole was exploiting sick children to seize Valemont. Hart Medical stock dropped sharply. The board demanded that Vivian step back from the Valemont acquisition. Adrian used an emergency clause to freeze her voting rights in the deal. And most cruelly, he locked access to Valemont's restricted pediatric pharmacy, where the only emergency medication capable of stabilizing Lily and Grace was stored. By evening, the worst happened. Lily's fever came first. Then Grace's, 2 different rooms, the same symptoms, burning skin, blue lips, irregular heartbeat, dropping oxygen. The alarm screamed through the pediatric hallway like funeral bells. Vivian ran between the 2 rooms, completely helpless for the first time in her life. She had money, power, reputation, the most expensive lawyers in the city, but none of those things could open the pharmacy door that Adrian had locked with a code of power. Adrian entered the private waiting room with documents in his hand. Vivian looked at him as if he were a stranger. "What have you done?" Adrian placed the papers on the table. "I am saving everything from your emotions." "My daughter is dying." "Then sign." Vivian stared at the papers. "What is this?" "Temporary control of the Valemont acquisition transferred to me, along with your voting rights in Hart Medical Ventures until this crisis ends." Vivian felt sick. "You are using Grace's life to force me to sign." Adrian lowered his head as if the situation pained him. "I didn't want it to come to this." "But you still did it." He looked up. "The world does not run on tears, Vivian. You know that better than anyone. Sign it. The pharmacy opens. Grace lives. She never has to know what her mother gave up." Vivian picked up the pen, not because she surrendered, because a mother would burn the world down for one more breath from her child. But before the pen touched the paper, the door opened. Ethan stepped inside. No suit, no tie, no billionaire's polish. He was still the father in the dusty jacket from that first day, except now his eyes were not begging anyone. Behind him came 2 lawyers, a federal medical fraud investigator, Valemont's chief pharmacist, and an older man in a black coat. Adrian frowned. "What is this?" Ethan placed another folder on the table. "Not a performance." The older man stepped forward. "I am Federal Judge Morrison. An emergency order was approved 7 minutes ago." Adrian looked at Vivian, then at Ethan. Ethan continued. 3 days ago, I began purchasing Valemont's emergency debt through secondary creditors. By this morning, Cole Meridian held enough position to request temporary oversight of the hospital's medication distribution system in the presence of documented medical fraud." Adrian went pale. "That's impossible." "You were busy performing for the media. I was busy saving my child." The chief pharmacist walked toward the door. "The pharmacy is being opened under emergency order." Adrian lunged as if to stop him, but the federal investigator stepped into his path. The sound of a code being entered echoed from the hallway. One long beep. Then the restricted pediatric pharmacy opened. In Lily's room, the medication entered her IV line. In Grace's room, Vivian stood beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand with both of hers, her lips trembling without sound. Ethan stood between the 2 doorways. He looked at Lily, then at Grace, then at Vivian. None of them knew how to pray properly, but all of them were praying with every breath. Lily stabilized first. 10 minutes later, the tightness in her chest eased. Color slowly returned to her lips. Her small hand relaxed against the sheet. Ethan lowered his head until his forehead touched his daughter's hand. No one heard what he said. Maybe he did not say it out loud. 32 minutes later, Grace stabilized. Vivian collapsed into the chair beside her daughter's bed, both hands covering her mouth. Her body shook, not because she was weak, but because all the fear she had held inside finally found a way out. Ethan stepped in. He did not say, "It's okay," because nothing was truly okay yet. He simply sat beside her. They stayed there in silence for a long time. Between them was the steady sound of machines, the smell of disinfectant, the cold white light of the hospital. The truth that sometimes victory does not feel like victory. Sometimes it only feels like the first breath after almost drowning. Adrian was arrested before dawn. The evidence came from everywhere. Medication room footage, false invoices, the drained charity fund, tampered medication logs, denied emergency cases. And finally, the testimony of a young doctor who admitted Adrian had ordered records to be altered after complications from an old experimental pediatric program. Valemont had once allowed a network of powerful people to test medication on infants under the cover of advanced supportive care. Lily and Grace were not the only victims. They were simply 2 children who survived long enough for the truth to find its way back. Vivian did not cry when Adrian was handcuffed. She stood at the hospital entrance and watched the man she had almost married being led into a police car. He turned back once, as if he still expected her to soften. But Vivian saw only a stranger. She had already cried enough for him. Or rather, she had cried enough for the version of herself that had believed he was home. That evening, Ethan found Vivian in the small chapel behind the hospital. It was quiet there. No gold, no marble, no expensive flowers. Only a few wooden benches, a small lamp, and the faint smell of old candle wax. Vivian sat in the last row. She no longer looked like the untouchable CEO no one could defeat. She was only a tired mother, hands folded together, eyes fixed on nothing. "I should have seen it sooner," she said when Ethan sat beside her. "No," Ethan said. Vivian gave a sad smile. "You don't have to comfort me." "I'm not. I'm telling the truth." Ethan looked at the small lamp ahead of them. People like Adrian survive by not being seen. He made himself into whatever others wanted to believe. Vivian was quiet. After a while she asked, "Have you ever believed the wrong thing?" Ethan thought of his late wife, Claire, the woman who had once told him a man could protect the whole world and still lose his family if he did not learn how to come home in time. He had not come home in time. The day Claire died in a car accident, he had been in another city, in a large meeting, signing a large contract, earning a large amount of money. All of it became meaningless when the phone rang. "Yes," Ethan said, "I once believed I still had plenty of time." Vivian turned to look at him. In that moment, she did not see billionaire Ethan Cole. She did not see the dusty father who had been laughed at in the lobby. She saw a man who had lost too much, and so when he carried his daughter into the hospital, he no longer cared what the world thought of him. And Ethan saw something similar in Vivian. Not the millionaire CEO, not the woman from magazine covers, but a mother who had built walls too high around her child, only to realize the little girl inside was still lonely. They did not fall in love in that moment. Real feelings do not arrive like thunder in cheap stories. They come like a small lamp being lit after a storm, not enough to warm the whole room at once, but enough to let someone know they are no longer sitting in the dark alone. In the weeks that followed, Valemont changed. Not the kind of change the media liked to photograph. Real change. Vivian completed the acquisition and abolished the rule requiring deposits before pediatric emergency treatment. Ethan funded the entire Children's Access Fund again, but with one condition. Every dollar in and out had to be published monthly for anyone to review. The receptionist who had delayed Lily's care was fired. But Ethan did not stop there. He demanded that the entire emergency intake process be rebuilt so that no employee would ever again have the power to judge a child's life by the mud on a parent's shoes. The young doctor who came forward was protected, then promoted to lead medical ethics oversight. Families who had once been turned away were found, apologized to, and compensated. Valemont still had marble floors. It still had gold-trimmed elevators. But above the pediatric emergency desk, a new sentence was engraved into the wall. No child must prove ability to pay before being saved. Lily and Grace recovered slowly, then loudly. Lily taught Grace how to fold paper airplanes from discharge forms. Grace taught Lily how to use the hospital tablet to order extra pudding without asking a nurse. Lily called the hospital soup rich people dishwater. Grace laughed so hard that a doctor came in to check whether her chest hurt. Ethan and Vivian often stood outside the room, watching the two girls like they were watching a miracle wearing hospital gowns. 1 year later, Valemont's new pediatric emergency center officially opened. Its name was the Hart Cole Children's Wing. On the day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the lobby was full. Reporters lined both sides. Doctors stood in white coats. Families who had once received help held their children close in the back rows. Vivian stepped onto the stage in a soft white suit, her hair neatly tied back. She was still beautiful, still elegant, still impossible to ignore. But she no longer looked like a woman standing behind glass walls. When she spoke, she did not look at the cameras. She looked at the children. "This hospital once made mistakes," Vivian said. "I made mistakes too. We allowed rules, money, image, and pride to stand above the only thing that should have mattered first, the life of a child." The lobby was silent. Vivian looked down at the front row. Ethan sat there, Lily on one side and Grace on the other. Both girls wore light-colored dresses. Each held a stuffed animal. Pepper, Lily's white rabbit, had been washed clean, though one tiny dust stain remained on one ear because Lily refused to let anyone replace him. Vivian continued, "From today on, no child who enters these doors will ever be asked about money before being allowed to breathe." Applause filled the lobby, not loud in the way of glamorous events, warm, long, real. After the ceremony, the crowd slowly dispersed. Lily pulled Grace by the hand and ran across the lobby. The two girls stopped at the exact spot where Ethan had once knelt with Lily limp in his arms. Lily looked up at Vivian. "Miss Vivian." "Yes, sweetheart." "You saved us." Vivian knelt and gently brushed Lily's hair back. "No," she said softly. "Your father saved you." Lily thought about that, then she looked at Ethan. "So Daddy saved you too?" Before Ethan could answer, Grace took his hand. "No," Grace said very seriously. "They saved each other." Vivian stood still. Ethan looked at Grace, then at Lily. At last he smiled. It was not a polite smile, not the exhausted smile of a father always preparing for the next emergency. It was quiet, real, and almost unfamiliar on his face. Vivian reached out her hand. Ethan looked at it. 1 year earlier in this same lobby he had walked in with mud on his shoes, dust on his jacket, and terror in his eyes. People had laughed at him, judged him, believed he did not belong there, but now he understood something. Some doors do not open because of money. Some families are not born from blood. Some lives only begin again after we believe we have lost everything. Ethan took Vivian's hand. Lily cheered. Grace smiled. And in the hospital that had once judged him by his clothes, Ethan Cole finally received something all his wealth had never been able to buy. Someone who understood his fear. A child who was alive. Another child who had pulled his daughter out of loneliness. And a new home, not built from marble or gold, but from hands that had once trembled with the fear of losing each other and still chose to hold on. That day no one laughed at the father in the dusty jacket anymore, because at last they understood. He had not entered Valemont as a poor man. He had entered as a father, and in this world there is no higher title than that.